My son flew in from Denver on a Tuesday, which should have been my first warning. He never visits on Tuesdays. He's a regional sales manager for a medical device company, and Tuesdays are when he runs his pipeline reviews. But there he was at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, drinking the coffee I'd brewed before my walk, telling me his sister was already in town and they needed to talk to me about something important. I was 68 years old. I'd buried my wife 3 years earlier. I'd had a small bypass surgery the previous spring, and the look on my son's face was the same look he used to wear when he was 12 and had broken something he didn't want to admit to. I sat down across from him. I asked him where his sister was. He said she was at the hotel. I asked why she didn't just stay at the house like she always did. He looked at his coffee for a long time before he answered. That afternoon, the three of us sat in the living room. My daughter had brought a folder. She's an attorney in Phoenix, divorced mostly, and she had that particular quietness she gets when she's about to say something she's already rehearsed. My son sat next to her on the couch I'd picked out with their mother in 1996. The folder sat on the coffee table between us like a small, flat animal nobody wanted to touch. She told me they were worried about me. She used the word concerned. She said I'd been forgetful. She brought up the time I'd called her by her cousin's name at Thanksgiving, which I had done because they look alike when the light is bad, and I'd had 2 glasses of wine. She mentioned that I'd missed an oil change appointment. She said the cardiologist had told them, plural, that I needed to start thinking about the future. I asked what they meant by the future. My son finally spoke. He said there was a place outside Boulder, a community. They had different levels of care. They could start me in the independent living wing and move me up as needed. He said the house was too big for one person. He said the stairs were dangerous. He said the property taxes alone were eating into what their mother had left. I asked them how long they'd been planning this. Neither of them answered. My daughter slid the folder toward me. Inside was a brochure for the place in Boulder, glossy photographs of silver-haired people doing Tai Chi on a green lawn. There was also a document, power of attorney, durable, healthcare and financial both. She'd already drafted it. My name was typed at the top. The signature line was blank, waiting. I told them I needed to think. My son said, of course. My daughter said there was no rush, but the unit they toured was popular and it might not be available much longer. She left the folder on the table when they went back to the hotel. I sat in that room until it got dark. I didn't turn on a lamp. I thought about my wife who had loved that couch, who had picked it because the fabric reminded her of her grandmother's parlor. I thought about my son at 12 breaking a window with a baseball, and how he looked at me then with the same expression he'd worn that morning. I thought about my daughter who at 14 had argued me out of grounding her with a logical structure so airtight I'd actually laughed and let her go to the dance. I didn't sign that night. I didn't sign the next morning either. They flew home on Thursday with my promise that I would think it over carefully. My daughter hugged me at the door and said she loved me. My son shook my hand, which is what he does instead of hugging now. I should have known then. I think I did know. I just didn't want to know. 6 weeks later, I came home from a doctor's appointment to find a moving truck in my driveway. The cardiologist had cleared me for normal activity. My ejection fraction was up. My blood pressure was steady. I'd driven home with the radio on, thinking about whether I'd grill a piece of fish for dinner or just heat up the soup my neighbor had brought over the day before. I turned onto my street and there was a yellow truck halfway up my driveway and 2 men in matching shirts loading my recliner into the back. I parked at the curb. I got out slowly because that's how I do everything now. I walked up the driveway and asked the man holding my recliner what he thought he was doing. He looked at me like I was a stranger. He pulled a clipboard out of the cab and read me the address. It was my address. He said the homeowner had hired them for a full-service relocation. He said the homeowner had signed the contract 2 weeks ago. I asked him who the homeowner was. He read me my daughter's name. I didn't yell. I want you to understand that. I have never been a man who yells. My father yelled and I spent my whole adult life teaching myself the opposite of him. I asked the man calmly to put the recliner back. He said he couldn't do that without authorization from the contract holder. He said if I had questions, I should call the number on the work order. He handed me a copy. I walked around the side of the house and tried the back door. It was locked. I tried the kitchen door off the patio. Locked. I went back to the front. The lock cylinder was new, brass instead of nickel. They'd had a locksmith out. While I was getting my heart checked, there was an envelope taped to the inside of the storm door. My daughter's handwriting. I knew it from 40 years of birthday cards. I didn't open it on the porch. I drove to the diner 2 blocks away, the one where my wife and I used to get pie on Sunday afternoons before her hip got bad. I sat in a booth and ordered black coffee. I opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages long. My daughter had typed it on her firm's letterhead, which I noticed because it gave the whole thing a particular kind of weight. She wrote that she and her brother had reached a difficult decision, that they loved me, that they could no longer in good conscience watch me decline alone in a house that was too much for me, that my wife, their mother, would have wanted this, that a unit had opened up in the Boulder community and they had taken the liberty of reserving it on my behalf, that my belongings, the essential ones, would be transported there over the weekend, that the house would be listed Monday morning, that a buyer was already lined up through her brother's connections, an all-cash offer, quick close, that the proceeds would be placed in a managed account for my care, that she had used the durable power of attorney I had executed at her office to authorize the sale. I had not executed any power of attorney at her office. I had not signed the document she'd left on my coffee table. I had put it in a drawer in the kitchen and forgotten about it for 2 weeks, and then thrown it away when I cleaned out that drawer last month. I read the letter twice. Then I asked the waitress for a pen. On the back of the 3rd page, I wrote 4 words. You misread the deed. I folded the letter, paid for my coffee, left a $5 tip, and drove to the public library because I wasn't going back to that driveway and I wasn't ready yet to call anyone. I sat at one of the computer terminals in the reference section and pulled up the county recorder's website. I typed in my address. The records came up the way they always come up. The house was not in my name. It had not been in my name for 9 years. After my wife's first cancer scare, when we thought she had 2 years and it turned out she had 9, we'd sat down with an estate attorney an old colleague of mine had recommended. We had set up a revocable living trust. We'd put the house in it. We'd put most of our liquid assets in it. When my wife passed, the trust had become irrevocable as to her share, and I'd taken over as sole trustee. Everything that mattered, the deed, the brokerage accounts, the bond ladder I'd built for retirement income, sat inside that trust. The trust was its own legal entity. Even my durable power of attorney, if I'd signed one, wouldn't have given anyone authority over trust assets. That's the whole point of the structure. My children had grown up watching me practice law, tax law mostly, and some estate planning later in my career, before I retired at 62. They knew I'd set up trusts for clients. It had never occurred to them, apparently, that I might have set one up for myself. I drove to a hotel near the airport. I checked in under my own name with my own credit card. I sat on the edge of the bed and called the man who had been my friend since law school, a litigator who had moved into elder law about 10 years before he retired. Except he hadn't really retired. He'd just stopped taking new clients except for people he loved. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Drive over." He said it the way he used to say it when we were both 30 and one of us needed help. He lives an hour west of me in a farmhouse he and his wife restored over 20 years. I drove out that evening. His wife made us sandwiches. He cleared off the dining room table and we worked until past midnight. The first thing he did was confirm what I already knew. The house could not be sold. My daughter could file whatever paperwork she wanted. She could even produce a forged power of attorney, which I suspected she had done, because the letter had described her using one I'd never signed. The trust owned the property. I was the sole trustee. Any deed transferring the house out of the trust without my signature as trustee would be void on its face. The title company would catch it the moment they ran the chain. The second thing he did was harder. He asked me what my son did for a living. I told him, regional sales manager, medical devices, cardiac monitoring equipment. He asked me what company. I told him. He typed for a while on his laptop. His face changed. The company my son worked for had been acquired 18 months ago by a private equity firm. The new ownership had restructured the sales force and pushed everyone onto commission-heavy contracts with aggressive quotas. My son's territory had been carved up. His income had been cut almost in half. I knew none of this. He'd told me at Christmas that things were going great. His mortgage in Denver was on a house he and his wife had bought at the top of the market in 2022. Adjustable rate. The reset had hit 8 months ago. They were underwater and the payment had jumped by $1,900 a month. My friend leaned back in his chair. He said, "Your son didn't dream up this nursing home idea by himself. Your daughter is the lawyer. Your son is the one who needs the money to move. I asked him how confident he was. He said he wasn't running a courtroom. He was running an inference, but it was a strong one. He said the buyer my daughter had mentioned, the all-cash quick close, was probably a friend of my son's offering below market in exchange for a fast deal. He said he could find out by Monday morning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room with the window cracked because his wife always overheats the house, and I thought about my son when he was 4 years old and afraid of thunder. He used to climb into our bed during storms and fall asleep with one small hand wrapped around my thumb. I lay there and grieved that boy because the man he had become was a stranger to me now in a way I had not yet processed. In the morning, my friend made coffee and we got to work. We filed an emergency notice with the county recorder by 10 a.m., flagging any pending transactions on the property. We sent a certified letter to the moving company demanding the immediate return of all my possessions and putting them on notice that they were in possession of items belonging to a trust they had no contractual relationship with. We contacted the locksmith who had changed my locks, an honest man who had no idea anything was wrong, and got him to come back out that afternoon and rekey everything to a new set of keys held only by me. My friend called the brokerage where my retirement accounts were held. The accounts were trust assets, but he wanted to know if anyone had attempted access. The broker put us through to compliance. Compliance told us there had been an attempted change of address request the previous week, routed to a P.O. box in Denver. The request had been flagged because of the trust structure. They had called the listed contact number, which was mine, and left a message I had never received because I never checked the landline answering machine anymore. They had not made any changes. My son had tried to redirect my mail. I sat with that for a while. By Saturday afternoon, my friend had pulled the property records on the house my son and his wife owned in Denver. He had also pulled records on a small LLC that my son had formed 8 months ago, supposedly for some side consulting work. The LLC's registered agent was the same as the registered agent for a property holding company that owned several rental units in the Denver suburbs. My friend dug a little further. The property holding company was owned by a man who, 11 years earlier, had been my son's college roommate. My friend looked up at me. He said, "That's your buyer. The plan was clean if you didn't know about the trust. My son's friend would buy my house at maybe 70% of market value through the LLC. He would flip it within 90 days. My son would receive a finder's fee through his consulting LLC, conveniently structured to avoid any obvious connection to the sale. My daughter would get the satisfaction of having me safely warehoused in Boulder, where she could visit on her way to ski trips. My son's mortgage problem would be solved." The story they would tell themselves and each other was that they had done a hard but loving thing for their declining father. I drove home Sunday night. The locks were mine again. The house was empty in a way I'd never seen it. They'd taken almost everything. The bedroom was bare. The kitchen had been picked through. They'd taken my wife's china. They'd taken her wedding ring, which I'd kept in the top drawer of my dresser for 3 years. I stood in the empty bedroom and I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not for the things. Things are things. I cried because my children had walked through these rooms making decisions about what was essential to me and what wasn't. And they had decided that the ring my wife had worn for 41 years was not. I called my daughter Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. She answered on the second ring. Her voice had the particular quality it gets when she's nervous and trying to sound in control. I asked her where she was. She said she was at her office. I told her to put me on speaker. She did. I asked if her brother was on the line as well. There was a pause. She said no. I told her to call him and conference him in. I would wait. It took her 4 minutes. I sat in the empty kitchen with my back against the wall and listened to the dial tone music. When my son came on, I told them both very calmly that the house was not for sale, that the house had not been mine to sell for 9 years, that the trust owned the house and they had no authority over the trust, that the deed they had attempted to file would be rejected, that I had already filed a notice of dispute, that I had already engaged counsel, that I knew about my son's college roommates LLC, that I knew about my son's mortgage, that I knew about the consulting company. My daughter started to interrupt. I asked her to let me finish. I told them that the durable power of attorney they had used did not exist, that my signature on it was a forgery, that forging a notarized legal document for the purpose of effecting a fraudulent transfer of real property was a felony in 3 different categories under the laws of our state, that the Bar Association in Phoenix took an extremely dim view of attorneys who participated in such activities, even peripherally. that I had documentation, that I had a friend who had spent 30 years of his career making people who did things like this very uncomfortable. I told them I wanted my mother's ring back. I called it that on purpose. Their mother's ring. I wanted her ring and her china and the photo albums they had taken from the closet in the den. I wanted them returned to my house by the end of the week. I wanted a written, signed statement from each of them acknowledging that the durable power of attorney was a forgery and that no legitimate transfer of authority had occurred. In exchange, I would not pursue criminal charges. I would not file a complaint with the Arizona bar. I would not make this a public matter. I told them I was finished talking. I told them my friend would be in touch with them by the end of the day to handle the logistics. I hung up. The phone started ringing again within the minute. It was my daughter. I let it ring. By that evening, she had called 14 times. By the next morning, 22. By Wednesday, 31 missed calls between the two of them. I didn't pick up any of them. My son flew back into town on Thursday. He came to the house alone. He stood on the porch and rang the doorbell. I let him stand there for a long time before I opened the door. He had aged 10 years and 2 weeks. His eyes were red. He had a cardboard box at his feet. His mother's china, wrapped in newspaper. The ring was in a small velvet bag on top. I didn't invite him inside. I stood in the doorway. He started to say something and then he started to cry. He sat down on the porch step with his face in his hands. I watched him. I didn't move toward him. I couldn't yet. After a while, he said the company had been crushing him. He said he hadn't slept properly in months. He said his wife was talking about leaving. He said he had been so frightened he had stopped being able to think clearly. He said his sister had been the one to bring up Boulder, but the timeline, the urgency, the buyer, all of that had been him. He said he was sorry. He said it over and over. He said it badly the way men say things they have not practiced and have never said before in their lives. I sat down on the step next to him, not close. There was a foot of space between us. I let him cry. I didn't say anything for a long time. When I finally spoke, I told him I loved him. I told him that was not in question and never had been. I told him that what he had done was the worst thing anyone had ever done to me. I told him I did not know if I could trust him again and that I wasn't going to lie to him about that to make him feel better. I told him his mother would have been heartbroken and that I was glad she hadn't lived to see this, which was the cruelest thing I had ever said to him, and which I meant. I told him I would not press charges. I told him that was not a forgiveness. It was a decision. I told him that he and his sister were going to write the statements I had asked for, and they were going to be honest in those statements, and they were going to live with what those statements said about them for the rest of their lives. I told him about the trust. I told him about how his mother and I had set it up 9 years ago, on a Saturday morning at a little office in a strip mall, and how we had eaten lunch afterward at a Vietnamese place she'd love. I told him that when she got sick the second time, she had asked me to make sure the kids would be all right after we were both gone. I told them that I had honored that promise, the only way I knew how, which was to make sure there would be something left for them when the time came. I told him that time was not now. I told him there would be no inheritance for me until I was actually dead. I told him that anything he received from me in the meantime would be a gift, freely given, on my terms, and that he had used up a great deal of credit with me on that front for the foreseeable future. I told him he could come inside and have a glass of water. I told him he could not stay the night. He nodded. He stood up. He came inside. He drank his water at the kitchen counter, where the rooster clock his mother had picked out in 1989 still ticked above the stove. He didn't try to hug me when he left. He understood, I think, that we weren't there yet. Maybe we wouldn't be for a long time, maybe ever. After he drove away, I went out to the backyard. The grass needed cutting. The hydrangeas my wife had planted along the fence were still blooming, blue and fat in the late afternoon light. I sat in one of the metal chairs we'd had since the kids were in elementary school. I listened to the cicadas. I am still in this house. I do not know if I will be here forever. The stairs are not actually dangerous. The property taxes are fine. The house is not too big for me because it is full of 43 years of marriage and 3 years of widowhood, and now a new chapter I did not ask for, and which I am still learning the shape of. My daughter wrote her statement. It took her 2 drafts. She has not been to the house since. She sends a card on my birthday and at Christmas. We are not speaking yet, and we may not for a while. Her marriage, I have heard secondhand, is not doing well. I am sorry for that, and I do not know what to do about it. My son calls every Sunday at 3 in the afternoon. We talk for 15 minutes. He tells me about his work. He tells me about his kids, my grandkids, who I have not seen since this happened. He has not asked to bring them to visit. I have not invited him to. We are both, I think, waiting for something neither of us can name. The Boulder community sent me a letter last month asking if I was still interested in the unit. They had managed somehow to put me on a mailing list. I threw the letter away and made myself a cup of coffee. I have learned some things at 68 that I wish I had not had to learn. I have learned that the people who love you the most can also be the people most able to harm you because they know where you are, soft. I have learned that fear makes ordinary people do things they would have sworn they were incapable of, and that the recognition of this should produce neither absolution nor surprise. I have learned that the documents you sign in your 50s matter more than you think they will when you are 70. I have learned that silence, used carefully, is a kind of language, and that there are things you can say with it that cannot be said any other way. If you have grown children, talk to them about your finances before something forces the conversation. If you have a house, put it where it cannot be taken. If you have something that matters to you, write down where it is and why, and give that paper to someone you trust who is not a beneficiary. And if one day you come home and there is a truck in your driveway and a letter on your door telling you what you have agreed to without ever having agreed to it, sit down somewhere quiet, drink a cup of coffee, and check the deed. Check it carefully. Read every page. The fine print is always where the real story is. I have thought about that afternoon many times since. The yellow truck in the driveway, the man holding my recliner like it was already someone else's furniture. The envelope taped to the storm door in my daughter's handwriting, and I've come to believe that nothing in that scene happened by accident. Every piece of it grew from seeds planted years before, by all of us, in soil none of us were paying attention to. Bennett did not become a man capable of forging his father's signature in a single afternoon. He became that man slowly, over months of silence, about his mortgage, of pride that would not let him ask for help, of fear that compounded every night while his wife stared at the ceiling beside him. Corinne did not draft a fraudulent power of attorney on a whim. She drafted it because somewhere along the way, she had decided that her intelligence entitled her to manage outcomes for people who would not ask to be managed. The choices they made against me were the harvest of choices they had been making against themselves for a long time. I am not innocent in this either. I see that now. I had grown comfortable being the quiet father, the one who did not pry, the one who did not pry, the one who trusted that everyone was doing fine because nobody had told me otherwise. Comfort is a soft word for cowardice when it costs you the truth about your own children. If I had asked Bennett a harder question at Christmas, if I had pushed past the easy answer, perhaps none of this would have happened. Perhaps it would have happened anyway. I will never know. What saved me was not luck. It was a Saturday morning 9 years earlier when my wife and I sat in a strip mall office with an attorney named Whitfield and did the unsexy, tedious work of putting our house inside a structure that could not be bullied. That morning was not romantic. We were tired. We argued about lunch, but we showed up and we signed our names and we did the thing that adults do when they love each other and the people they will leave behind. The trust did not protect me because I was clever. It protected me because the two of us on an ordinary Saturday took our future seriously enough to spend 3 hours on it. Strength at 68 does not look like what I thought it would look like at 30. It is not loud. It is not vengeance. It is the willingness to sit on a porch step beside a son who has betrayed you and tell him you love him, and also tell him the truth, and to mean both things at the same time, and to accept that holding both may take the rest of your life. If there is a lesson here, it is this. Do not wait until you are afraid to put your house in order. Do not assume the people who love you are immune to fear. And when the truck shows up in your driveway, sit down somewhere quiet, drink a cup of coffee, and check the deed. The fine print is where you find out who you really are.